Here's a Motorola mid-ranger with the promise of some good value, the Moto G82. You can find it on sale for less than $300, but this is a really competitive price bracket, so is this phone a solid choice? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our Moto G82 review. The Moto G82 is a mid-range phone that aims to deliver a balanced set of features for its class. It does stand out a bit from the crowd though, with a 120Hz OLED display, and a large battery and stereo speakers are quite welcome too. The phone is made from plastic, but the back panel feels a lot like glass. The silky smooth finish feels nice in hand, and the phone is overall pretty light and easy to handle. There is no official ingress protection, but Moto claims a water repellent design, which is better than nothing. Like I mentioned, one of the Moto G82's more attractive features is its 6.6-inch OLED display. It has a 120Hz refresh rate and a full HD resolution. The display is plenty bright for the class. We measured a maximum of around 500 nits with the manual brightness slider, and this can boost to nearly 700 nits in auto mode when in bright conditions. Swiping and scrolling on this display feels quite smooth thanks to the high refresh rate, which can dial down to 60Hz when you're not interacting with it to save power. And content on this OLED looks crisp and contrasty. The colors aren't the most accurate out of the box, but you can achieve great color accuracy through the settings. And while there isn't support for HDR content, you do get Widevine L1 for full HD streaming. The Moto G82 has both a headphone jack and stereo speakers for your audio. The speakers are loud, and the sound is clean, but lacking in bass. You get 128 gigs of storage on board the phone, and that is expandable through microSD card. And you can wake up and unlock the phone with a side-mounted fingerprint reader built into the power button. It's quite reliable. The chipset of the Moto G82 is a Qualcomm Snapdragon 695. We've seen this silicon quite a bit in the mid-range this year, and it provides decent performance for the class. It's efficient and supports 5G connectivity. But this chipset is no powerhouse, and its ISP also doesn't support 4K video recording. Still, despite that, the Moto G82 is able to deliver a relatively smooth user experience, thanks in part to its clean stock Android interface. You get Android 12 with just a few Moto features sprinkled on top. Like we've seen on other Moto phones, these features are organized within the Moto app. They include options for personalizing the looks of the interface, along with things like gesture shortcuts and a peek display which lights up the lock screen when you lift the phone. One thing that is missing is support for Ready 4, Motorola's platform for connecting its phones to other devices like a TV or monitor. I guess they saved that for the more expensive phones. The Moto G82 has a large 5000 mAh battery, and the battery life is really good here, as expected. The phone was able to score an excellent endurance rating of 130 hours in our tests. The G82 also comes with a 33-watt charger in the box. With it, we were able to charge the phone from 0 to 57% in half an hour, a pretty decent speed. Now let's get into the cameras. The Moto G82 has a 50-megapixel main cam with OIS, an 8-megapixel ultra-wide, and a 2-megapixel macro cam. It's a pretty typical setup for a mid-ranger, but even so, we found the main cam's performance a bit lackluster. During the day, you get good sharpness, but the exposure is on the darker side, and there's visible noise. Detail can be spotty in some parts of the scene, like foliage, and the white balance is off, lending an overall bluish cast. Portraits are just alright. The bokeh effect is decent, but you again get a darker exposure here, and the subject comes out a bit on the soft side. The ultra-wide's performance is nothing great. We don't expect too much quality from this sort of camera in this price range, but these photos are especially soft, and you get a darker exposure. At least the colors are lively. The 2-megapixel macro cam produces subpar images with not a lot of detail. They're also low contrast, and colors are a bit washed out. Low-light photos from the main cam are okay. They're noisy, but the dynamic range is pretty wide when HDR kicks in, which is almost all of the time. Colors are punchy, sharpness is okay, and the detail level is adequate. The night mode doesn't really improve the sharpness and detail. Actually, you may end up with a softer result, as the phone tries to clean up the noise. The colors are more muted as well. At least the exposure is brighter. The ultra-wide struggles to deliver usable photos after dark, and there's no night mode support to help things out here. Selfies from the 16 megapixel front-facing cam are decent as long as there's plenty of light. You can get solid detail and okay sharpness, and the subject's face is well exposed. As I mentioned earlier, the Moto G82 doesn't support 4K video capture. You're capped at 1080p. These sorts of recordings from the main cam are just alright. We do like the colors and the dynamic range, but they're overall a bit on the soft side. The ultra-wide cam's 1080p clips have good contrast and colors, but the sharpness is lacking, and the dynamic range is limited. So that's the Moto G82. For less than $300, it's a pretty solid mid-ranger overall, offering a nice 120Hz OLED screen, great battery life, and a clean Android UI. The main downside here is the cameras. They're pretty lackluster, even for this price range. But if that doesn't bother you, then the Moto G82 is a decent choice, and it's worth recommending. Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like to check out some alternatives to the Moto G82, here are a couple that we've reviewed on our channel. The first is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 11 Pro 5G. And then we have the Samsung Galaxy A33. See you next time.